guest and I had one of the most genuine conversations I've ever had about life in the music business. You may recognize Cassie Kelley as the wife of Charles Kelley from the country band Lady A, but she is so much more than just a wife of a famous artist. Cassie and I sat down and talked about her life before meeting Charles, how they met, and what the first few years were like when he was just starting out before gaining fame. The challenges, adjusting to a new normal, and what that was like on a new relationship. Recently, Charles and Cassie publicly shared about his struggle with alcohol and how it almost destroyed their marriage. Cassie vulnerably shares their story, how it affected her and their family, and what it was that was the final straw for her. Her honesty, her grace, and her love for her family is something truly moving to hear. I know so many women will feel like she is telling their own story with a partner struggling with addiction, and I hope you will feel inspired after listening. This was such a beautiful conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Cassie Kelley. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Today, I have Cassie Kelley with me, who I'm so excited to have you here. I'll introduce you for a second, and then you can fill in the blanks. Okay. You are a Nashville native, born and raised, one of the Nashville unicorns that are still here. And a lot of people would probably know you because you are married to Charles Kelley from Lady A. You have a big Instagram following, which you've actually had for a while. I kind of was thinking back that you might be one of the OG influencers. Do you kind of think that maybe a little? I feel like I followed you for a while, back when you were doing Womanista, which was a long time ago.
Yeah, I think I started Womanista in 2012. Maybe it was 2011. Honestly, okay. I can't remember. It feels like 1,000 years ago. But it really kind of was born out of, I had previously been working. And then when Charles's career kind of started getting busier and it just became more difficult for us to have a relationship if, I still was working Monday through Friday and he was working on the weekends. And so I, retired from my job. But really,
what was your job? Because you were, I think sometimes people can look at your life or anybody who's married to a celebrity or an artist and kind of just forget that maybe that person had a life before
as
being,
a person.
As their own person before being their own life. And you actually had quite a life before you met him. Tell us what you were doing before you met him.
When I graduated college, I moved to New York and started working at an entertainment PR firm. Okay. So I was working in publicity.
Did you go to school to be
I went to school for journalism and mass communication. So, you call PR kind of, I went to the dark side of the, from the journalism spectrum. But so I started working in PR for musicians and different bars, restaurants, entertainment things in New York. And then I moved back to Nashville. I got a job offer back here working at a music PR firm. And wasn't ready to leave New York, but felt like it was a good opportunity.
That was a good time to live in New York, right?
Yeah.
Was it like Sex and the City kind of era?
It was, except we had no money. Right. I had no money and neither did my roommates. Right. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 other roommates, so there was 4 of us.
But you probably didn't feel like, woe is us, we're so poor, we're all living together. Yeah.
It was such a fun time. I was right out of college. My roommates were right out of college. We were just, it's your first time kind of on your own and you're in a big, vibrant city and there's always stuff going on and friends to meet up with and it was so fun.
Did your parents encourage you to go to New York?
Oh, absolutely.
They did? That's awesome. Okay. Because I think sometimes too, as a girl, they're like, no, don't leave, don't do this. I love that they encouraged you.
No. And I went to Arizona State for college. So I went far away for college and they always encouraged me to go wherever I wanted to go. And, but when I moved back to Nashville and started working in PR here, it was really with the intent of just to live here for a couple years, build up my resume, save up some money, and then move back to Manhattan. Okay.
That was your dream.
That was the dream.
The dream.
And then I met my husband a month after I moved back to Nashville.
Wow.
So
was he in the band at that time?
He was in the band. He and Charles, or he and Hillary and Dave had first written together, I think it was summer 2006 and formed, or spring 2006, formed the band in August.
Right.
And then I met him January 2007.
Okay. So how old were you at that time?
I was 23.
23. So were you like with your plan of like, I'm going to go back to New York? Are you thinking like love is not in my cards right now? Like I'm going to work on myself and just be my own kind of independent New York woman at the time?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely was
along.
not like thinking I was going to meet anyone.
Yeah.
And he came along and we met one night. I mean, it was like that instant.
It was.
For me.
Where did you meet?
Love at first sight. We were having dinner with a big group of people at South Street, which is a restaurant in Nashville, no longer. We were having dinner there, and it was a big group of people, and he walked in late and was kind of sitting at the other side of the table. And I mean, the first time we like locked eyes, it was like, who is this?
Wow.
So I just felt that immediate connection with him. And we stayed out all night. We went down to Broadway and like, had such a great time. And
is he saying like, I'm in a band, this is what I'm going to do?
I mean, I knew he was in a band. They weren't signed yet.
Okay.
They just were like
trying.
A band. They were trying. They had some buzz in Nashville. So it wasn't zero, but he was not signed yet. They were really just starting out. And we just ended up like talking all night, like truly just talking, and had this special connection. And he actually, this is how old we are, that night we went back to his house and we're like chatting, and he made me a burn CD of
all his songs.
And I still have it. He wrote on it with Sharpie, "Guard with your life."
Oh my, you still
So
have
funny.
it? So you're not as old as me, because my husband made me a burned cassette.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit older. Like, yes, that was bad.
But that was January 2007. Wow. And
so when you're meeting him, you're like, okay, I have this plan. Like my grand plan is I'm going to work and go back to New York. Were you quickly like, that's not my plan anymore? Or are you still kind of dating thinking, I'm going back to New York? Did you tell him you were going back to New York?
Well, I think I knew I was going to be in Nashville for like a minute.
Okay.
I wasn't like going back 2 months later.
Yeah.
And I think when you're 23, you just aren't really thinking ahead so much anyway.
You're just literally like, live day by day.
Day to day, how we all probably should. But I knew I just had met him, and like we just kept kind of seeing each other. I think we like went out on a date every night that week.
Wow.
And the morning after the night I met him, I told my mom, I was like, I think I met the guy I'm going to marry.
What did she say?
Which is wild. I can't remember. I need to ask her what she was probably like, okay.
Does he say the same? I mean, maybe not the exact same, but did he feel that kind of instant thing too?
He felt that instant thing. I don't think he thought like I met this
because he's a guy.
woman
and he was
I'm
23.
Marry. Right. And it just felt like an instant, easy connection. And we had that time together, before he was signed, before he went on radio tour, which if, the listeners don't know what that is, that's like you go around the country and do radio interviews for long periods of time. You're never home. So getting to have that kind of foundation of dating, even though we were really young, I think was really important. Had we met when he was signed and kind of out on the road, I don't know that we could have cultivated a real relationship.
So how much time passed between kind of when you met and started dating to when they started, I guess, even got signed? How much longer did they get signed?
I think they got signed that like maybe 3 or 4 months later.
Okay.
And they signed to Capitol Records, and, got their manager, kind of built their whole team like in that season of a couple months, and started working on music. And I think their first album came out April 2008. So it was about, 15 months after we met.
Yeah. Were people supportive of your relationship? I've wondered that, like, here you are, you're like, oh, look, I have this degree and I had this great job and I'm really working on myself and I'm dating a musician. And were people supportive of that, or were they like,
Well, I, again, grew up in Nashville.
Right.
So,
I was wondering if it was different because you're here.
Right.
Yeah.
The wool was not over my eyes of like what that was a little bit. And my mom was a stylist and had worked in the music business. So she definitely had a touch point, and I think she was a little bit like, oh God.
Just because she knew what was ahead. Yeah.
Right.
But she knew what was ahead of you.
Exactly. She knew what that life looked like a little bit just from her perspective. And, I think too, probably his team was like, all right, this girlfriend,
Right. Because were Hillary and Dave dating anyone at the time?
Dave was not. Hillary had different boyfriends, but she was even younger.
Okay. She was younger than them?
Yeah. She was, when I met her, she was 20.
Wow. Which seems so young. Like when I think about it right now.
Right.
Like a baby.
Babies that they're, started off doing this. But again, she grew up in Nashville and with her mom in the music business. So she also sort of knew what it was like.
So his team's kind of like, great, we've got this new band and a label and a tour, and you have a girlfriend. Is she coming, or is what's
right?
What did you go along?
I was definitely, the first girlfriend, the first relationship in that group, and I think. When you're first starting out touring, you're in a van and you're not, so
it's not glamorous.
No. So I didn't go along.
Because there's nowhere for you to go. There's nowhere for you to sit or sleep. Yeah.
In fact, we had a conversation, probably 6 months into our relationship, and I was going to come with him to a show, and he was like, well, can you sell merch? Because we don't have room for anybody who's not doing something.
You need a job. I actually have a picture of myself selling merch behind a table. So
well, you are better than I am. I was like, no, I'm not going to sell the merch. Not that I don't.
I think I just did it one time. It wasn't a full-time job, but yes, I think.
I just was like, I don't want to fall into the role of working for you,
Yes.
So I at least had sort of that. My own insight of that, but we got into an argument about it because he was like, and then I didn't go.
Wow, but you were kind of establishing the boundaries from this is I'm not the sideline to your starring role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even just in a way of I didn't want to. We had a friendship with everyone, or I had a friendship with everyone. I didn't want to have to be responsible for a job for them.
Yes. It muddies the waters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you mess up the till and then they're all mad at you.
And then even, we got married before Hillary and Dave were married. So we were the first ones married and having to navigate all of what that looked like on the road. And, by then they were on a bus, but it was 13 people on the bus. Yeah. It was
everyone rode the same bus.
Right.
Yeah. So how long were you together when he asked you to marry him?
We were together for, he asked me to marry him Christmas 2008.
Okay. So a year?
A year, almost two.
Almost two. Okay.
Yeah, because we'd met January 2007 and this was almost, and then we got married July 2009.
When you're getting married or talking about getting married or even thinking about getting married, are you at all having conversations of this is what our life's going to probably look like with me on the road? Or were you just kind of we'll make it work. We're in love. We'll make it work.
I think we were young. I mean, I got married when I was 26, which we're still married, but that.
It seems young now, right?
So young.
Yeah, I know.
Especially when you're in the entertainment business. And especially when you're marrying a man in the entertainment business who's just I feel like it's definitely a delayed growing up process. So it was very young.
That's true. That's a good way. Yeah. I've never heard someone say that, but it definitely, I don't know why. Do you know why?
Well, I think men, maybe not every man, but a lot of men take a little longer to sort of grow up anyway.
No offense.
Yeah. And that's fine. Everyone should establish their personhood and who they are and what they love and enjoy their life. I think before you decide to partner with someone, but in the music business too, it's well, also you just are getting to not really have any responsibilities. I mean, you have people doing stuff for you and you get to sleep as late as you want and you get to drink on the job. And, there's just sort of all these little markers of you don't have to be responsible for anything. It's just adult summer camp on the road.
Yeah.
So I think we just didn't, obviously I was not thinking
you just followed your heart. Yeah,
totally.
I'm in love. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Was it hard the first, few months or year being married and him? Because is by this point, they're really starting to pick up traction. Had they picked up that traction yet at that point?
So they had, a lot of buzz. Their first album was successful. They had their first number one, which was Run to You, the week that we got married.
Oh, wow.
So that song went number one the week that we got married. But we still didn't have any money. It was like
I do know, yes.
It takes a minute for all of
Everyone
that
thinks
sort of,
you have a lot of money.
Right.
Yes. You're rich now.
Right.
You've made it.
So we couldn't also afford, there was no room on the bus, but I couldn't afford to fly to be with him.
Yeah.
And so they had their first number one the week that we got married. And then their first single off their second album, Need You Now, came out August 2009. So a month after we got married. And then from that point, it was just a rocket ship.
Yeah.
So it was our first year of marriage. It was the busiest year of his career of just everything kind of exploding. The Need You Now album came out February 2010. So we'd been married for about 6 months. And they performed on the Grammys the week that their album came out. And they performed Need You Now. And then it just really exploded.
Yeah.
So
how much was he gone that first year?
I mean, constantly.
Constantly. And you were not going?
I did go some of the time. But I didn't, I couldn't go as much. But then, as that sort of more opportunities grew and we got some more money and, I could go more.
Yeah. Were you working in Nashville or were you?
I was still working.
Still working. Okay. But there was no more, knew you weren't going back to New York.
I was now married in Nashville. This is where I was living. So that first year of marriage and the biggest kind of craziest launch pad for his career happened in that same year. And so there was a lot to navigate. And we were, I was 26 years old.
Yeah.
So
did you find yourself, because I think when you start spending a long amount of time away from somebody, right? And so many things start creeping in. And when you're not able to have especially back then, could you FaceTime? Were you FaceTiming back then?
I can't remember.
I doubt it.
I don't think we were FaceTiming.
Maybe Skyping.
I know.
No, I don't think you were FaceTiming
I think
back then.
We were sort of a little bit OG texting and phone calls, but
But it's you've got that long distance, right? He's there. You feel like you're kind of stuck at home. I use that term loosely. He's gone, having doing all this stuff, and you don't have that face-to-face connection. So you're either texting or the voice, and you're tired, he's tired, and you're probably frustrated, you're missing each other. Are you having arguments about silly things? Is it coming out in frustration, or were you still in that?
Oh no, our first year of marriage was very hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we were constantly arguing. I mean, it was a very hard transition with all that was going on. And it was we were not seeing eye to eye.
Right.
He was exhausted, constantly working. I mean, it was a very hard year. I mean, I was is this going to work?
Right.
Thankfully it did. Yeah. But it was a year of...
Well, I think in marriage too, when you're a young girl growing up and you're thinking about marriage, or, you've looked at your own parents' marriage, it's being married to a musician is not in that handbook, right?
Right.
And everything that comes with it. And you probably then too had other girlfriends who seem to have, they're dating or they're in marriages, and, he's working a 9 to 5 and he's coming home every night and he's there on the weekends.
Right.
And you're kind of nobody gets it. Did you have anyone that, were you hanging out with other women at the time that were in the same situation?
And I am really thankful for that. We also very early on in premarital counseling actually started.
Did you do that?
We did.
Okay, I just interviewed someone yesterday on healthy habits of happy couples, and one of them was pre-marriage counseling. And I was I don't think I even knew that existed. But okay, so you thought it was beneficial?
It was beneficial because we started going to a place called Porter's Call.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're
that.
familiar, but it's an organization in Nashville that is a nonprofit counseling agency for musicians and their families. So it's free.
Okay.
And it is specifically focused on the life and the struggle of what your struggles are uniquely being in the music business.
Okay.
So
had someone told you how did you know to go there?
It was actually one of Charles's agents at CAA who was maybe on the board there, or John Huey. And he was there's this counselor. At that point, it was just Al Andrews, who was the founder. And he said, you guys should go. So we did premarital counseling, but it was with someone who knew what was about to happen to us.
Right.
And, the way he talked about it too was like, doing premarital counseling is kind of like trying to teach somebody how to swim, but not putting them in the water. It's like, you kind of go like this, but you don't really get it until, at that point it's like, oh, are our issues going to be whose family are we going to spend Christmas with?
Right.
It's like, that's...
Yes, that was the least of, that's the least of our worries. My issue is, am I spending Christmas with you at this point?
Right. So thankfully, we, even before we got married, had that foundation and that touch point of counseling with someone who knew what the unique struggles were. Right. So just having that was huge. And being able to go in there when we needed it was, probably saved our marriage in many ways.
Really? Wow, I've never even heard of that. That's a great organization. I'm
They're
going to put their
incredible.
website.
I'm actually on the board there now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because it's just meant so much in our life and is so important. I think especially for a spouse, because it's, free counseling for someone if your partner's a touring musician too. Yeah. So it's just, and something like, I forget the statistic, but maybe 85% of the clients that go there would not be able to go if it wasn't free. So people think it's like, oh, these successful musicians, well, why are we giving them free counseling? Right. But it's truly, that's such a small percentage. Yes. It really is people that are like in the grind day to day.
The struggling musician.
Right. What we were when we first got married. Yeah. And it's such an incredible organization.
Yeah. Wow. So for everybody that thinks it's so glam, they see someone get married to a country music artist or an artist and they're like, oh, they're so lucky. Like, the life must be so amazing. In that first year, like, can you look back and remember, just even from your perspective, not necessarily his, or his both, like what some of the kind of issues were that you struggled with?
Gosh, I wish I had journaled more, honestly.
I know. I've never written a journal in my life. I keep saying I'm going to.
I say that too, and then I still don't do it because I'm like, I'm going to want to look back at this season too. But, I think it probably was mostly just communication. Yeah.
Because you're also like on two different like time slots. Totally. You're working in the day, he's working at night. Yeah.
And just like not having time together and not having that point of connection, daily or weekly even, where we really could be on the same page. Yeah. And, I can be a strong personality. Yeah. Charles can definitely be a strong personality. And so I think we just like butted heads trying to, when you get married, and you're one city, he's one city, and you're trying to build a city together, some buildings are going to have to get knocked down in each person's city. Yeah. And that can be painful. Like that growth and that figuring out how we're navigating life in a partnership is tough. Yeah. Especially when you're 26 and like.
Did you ever get to a point where you finally thought, okay, we've gotten into our groove, like we're figuring this out? Are you still figuring it out?
Gosh,
did it get easier? Him traveling?
It got easier when I could start going. Okay. When he and Hillary and Dave shared a bus for a long time. Okay. Like they didn't get their own buses for a long time, but even then I could still go. Yeah. But they weren't on the bus with like everyone. Yeah. So it got easier when I could go and we could experience that life together. Yeah. Because he was going all over the world. Yeah. And so to get to have also then that foundation of getting to have all of those firsts and those exciting experiences
with him. Yes.
Before we had a child too was really special and important.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question because I know everybody always wants to know this from any woman married to a musician, was if you ever struggled with jealousy or just kind of like feeling insecure just with a husband in that limelight.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you ever find a way to effectively deal with that?
I'm thankful that I have like very authentic friendships. My female friendships in my life are like gold. Yeah. They were then, they still are now. and just knowing my own self-worth through other avenues.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thankful that I didn't ever just like find my sole identity in being Charles Kelley's wife.
Yeah.
So that is helpful. And I've always, you know, had a healthy enough self-esteem to know my own self-worth.
Yeah.
But that doesn't deny the fact that there are girls everywhere who see this, you know, sort of like up on a pedestal version, the performer version of Charles Kelley, and don't know who he really is.
Right.
And, you know, that can be tough. I mean, to have trust, to have, you know, to find your own value. And then once social media comes along and it's just like a dumpster fire.
I mean, yes, it's an absolute dumpster. That's a great way to put it.
You know, you have to really find a way to like not feed into any of those comments.
Yes.
'Cause that added a whole other, you know, level of crazydom.
Right. Do you think if you hadn't done like the pre-counseling or known him before he was who he was, like, do you think you would have been as secure in your marriage if you hadn't kind of known him back then?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we got to grow together in a way of like, as his fame was rising, you know, we were together and that was growing together. If I had met him where he already sort of was at that point, I think that would have been tough and also just tough for him, you know, for both of us to like figure out what compromise looked like.
Right.
You know, I think once you've been in this place for so long, you know, and you have these people that are yes people and doing things for you, you know, you are less in practice of compromising with someone.
For sure.
So I think that would have been harder too. We talk about all the time, like, he says, like, if I had waited until my 30s to get married, like, I don't know if I would have ever gotten married because I would have just gotten sort of used to a life where I'm the center of it. And that's, you know, hard to sort of depart from.
Yeah. John always says that, like, nothing is more humbling than walking in the door. Like, he's like, absolutely nothing. Like, he's coming in and I'm like, the trash needs taken out. And he's like, wow. I mean, it's just.
Right.
But I think they do. I mean, he makes jokes about it, but I think it is what grounds them.
Yeah.
And if they're those kind of, some men, I think, don't want that. But I think if they are good men like that, then they appreciate that kind of groundedness.
Right.
I know. I think people are always just like, how does someone deal with jealousy? Like, how I could never do that. And then sometimes it's like, but you're the one doing it. You're the girl out there doing it. And now you're asking me the question.
Right.
So, okay.
And, you know, I think too, part of it is like knowing your own worth of like, well, this person has to bring something to the table too. Like, I'm not just here to serve them.
Yeah.
You know, like, I want to be in a partnership where this person is bringing something to the table for me and just having that understanding. And I think, you know, that's never looks perfect when you're married to someone in the spotlight, but, you know, trying to navigate that is healthy.
Do you feel like, were you able to always have like good open communication, like at home or on the road? Like, did you always feel like you could say, communicate? You didn't?
No. I definitely, and as you know, in Charles's sobriety, our marriage is completely different. I mean, it's a marriage that I'm like, oh, this is what everybody's been doing the whole time. Like, it was a real eye opener of now being able to have that like really open communication.
What made you feel like you couldn't have the open communication? Were you even aware that you felt like that, or you just didn't?
No. I mean, I think I wasn't. Oh, maybe I was a little bit of just, there were certain things that you, like, I'm walking around eggshells on. And I think anyone who is in a relationship of someone who is an alcoholic or has other addiction issues, you know, it's those same codependency things that you develop of like, okay, I need to make sure that person's fine and then I'm fine. And I don't want to, you know, upset the apple cart in a way of like.
And did it kind of just slowly build over time? Like, you almost probably didn't even notice it was, and then it was just there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but being now in a place of like, in a recovery program for myself of like unwinding that codependency and him being in his own recovery program in sobriety, you really start to see those like stark things of like, wow, this is so different.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful.
So recently you shared, okay, well, let me back up for a second because you're married, they take off, you're doing well, you're at home, you get to start to go, you're making more money. When did you quit your job?
I think I quit my job in 2011.
Okay.
And then...
Is that when you started doing the Womanista?
So shortly after I did, I realized like, okay, well, I'm on the road and there's a lot of free time in the day and I would like a creative outlet. And that's when I started Womanista.
Did you have fashion training? Because it was all really about fashion and you're very fashionable. Did you ever do any sort of like school for that?
I didn't.
Okay.
My mom was a stylist as
okay.
I was growing up. She actually has her fashion merchandising degree.
Okay.
But I was always around fashion.
Yeah.
So that, and then now my mom has clothing stores in Nashville. So I always was around that and I always have enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So it really, Womanista started, there was a lot of fashion, but it was really also like, okay, I'm getting to travel the world and go to different places. And I wanted to be able to highlight like, this is a cool boutique in Calgary, or this is a really interesting like restaurant.
That's what I mean. It was like the OG, like what people do now all the time. You didn't even realize you were doing it.
And it was just fun for me.
Yeah.
And I remember my first post, I started when we were in Canada on the road. And, it was fun to just get to do that and have that outlet and explore the cities that I was in. Because I think a lot of times when you're touring, you like never leave the arena.
Yes.
So it allowed me to just get out and like go explore the city that I was in. Okay. And I remember like the first day, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like 12 views on this. 12 people have seen this page.
Now I'm famous, Charles. Yeah.
But even just like that little piece was like, this felt so exciting for me.
Thing. Yeah. And it was like a creative outlet. Okay. So you are now touring with him. You've got your Womanista. And then how long after did you have your son? My son was born in February 2016. Okay. So it was and he was conceived like late spring 2015. Okay. And I heard you tell a really great story about when you had him and your kind of fertility journey up until that point. Would you share it? Because I think it's just a beautiful, hopeful story.
So we definitely struggled to conceive him. We started going to Nashville Fertility in probably fall 2014. And, went through all the testing and everything. And we're told April 2015-ish probably that like without IVF, we had probably a 1% chance of conceiving a child. And so we were bummed out, obviously, but it was also a blessing of just to be like, okay, well, we have an answer here. And he had a really busy tour that summer. I had, a bunch of other stuff going on that summer. And it was like, okay, well, we'll have a fun summer and then we'll do IVF in the fall. And hopefully that works and we have a baby. And I got pregnant in May.
Wow.
Like a month after we were told that.
Wow.
And so that really like was a shock.
Yeah. You're like, wait, what happened to my fun summer? Now I'm like throwing up over the toilet.
It was a great shock, but yes, a shock.
Wow.
I know I had a fun like kind of blogger trip with my friend Mary to Italy that July. And I was like, I didn't expect to be in my first trimester when we were here, but here we are. But it was obviously such a blessing. And that same month that Ward was conceived, I partnered with a digital media company in Nashville to sort of relaunch Womanista just as a women's lifestyle site that wasn't, my personal blog. So it was like a lot of new life kind of at the same time.
Gotcha. Wow.
And then Ward was born the following February.
How was that with tour life and a new baby?
Well, Charles also had recorded a solo album. Hillary was taking some time off. Yep. She had her babies and...
you kind of all had babies at the same time, didn't you? In and around like this a couple years? Okay.
Hillary, Charles and I got married first, so had to navigate all of the first as a married couple on the road. And then Hillary had a child first, so she had to navigate all of that first baby stuff on the road. So, we could kind of see how she did it.
Okay, saw how it was going to work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you travel with him?
Yes. So he had put out his solo record and then had a tour planned for his solo album. When Ward was born February 16th, he left like end of February and was home 4 days in March and 2 days in April.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you don't feel like traveling. It's not like you're like, take me with you. You just want to be at home with your baby.
Before your child has shots, you can't.
Yes.
I mean, you could, but.
So you were at home alone?
I was at home alone. And I mean,
were you fine with that though?
No, I was hanging by a thread.
Okay. I was going to say, were you just happy to have a baby, you go do your thing? Or were you like, I cannot believe you've left me?
No, I was hanging by an absolute thread. Ward never slept.
Oh, really?
So I was just exhausted. He was never home.
And then that puts another stress on your marriage.
I definitely struggled with some postpartum depression and anxiety.
Did you know you had it at the time?
No. But obviously in hindsight, you realize. Yeah. So it was a very, very tough season.
Which is hard because you feel like you've been looking forward to that season, especially when you're told you're probably not going to have a baby on your own. You have a baby on your own and you're like, but then why am I not feeling this miraculous feeling?
Right. Yeah. And I also felt sad for Charles that he was missing those first few months. I mean, it was really like...
Because is he kind of at the mercy of like the label and what they want him to do, or just the album?
Well... he had been so excited to put out, he was so passionate about this music that he was putting out that it was like, and he'd gotten a Grammy nomination for it. And he was really excited to be able to tour on this project. And it just so happened, we didn't know that we would get pregnant and have a baby in that timing. So I felt sad for him that like he had these two really special things. I mean, nothing's more special than your child, but I wanted him to be able to have that experience.
So you're like mad that he's missing it for him, but also for you.
It's more sad. It's just like, this is, I'm sad for him that he doesn't get to be here. And these, of course, you're also like not sleeping. So like, I'm happy that he's out there sleeping.
Is he frustrated that he's missing it too?
Yeah, I think there was definitely like that longing of both things. Of like, I love getting to be out here and play this music, and I also am missing being with my child. Yeah. So, early April, I think like right after Ward had gotten his shots, I was like, I cannot sit here in this house alone anymore. We're going on the road.
We're coming for you. Yes.
But I mean, it was like, I'm a new mom and stressed out. And like the first time out on the bus, I like forgot even a, crib sheet for the mattress of the little bassinet he was in. And like, he woke up the first time in the night, he was like stuck to the plastic.
You're like, I'm failing. We're going home. This was a bad idea.
I know. So, See,
and I think people, and I love that you share that because that's just such a normal thing. Every mom has gone through at some point and worse. But it's like, I just think, especially through the fault of social media, and people post these photos. I follow a lot of artists and their wives, and they post these photos of themselves on the road, and everything's amazing, and the bus is so clean, and everyone's in the perfect like home edit organized containers, right? And nobody's forgetting a crib sheet. Like, no, everything's just perfect, and the baby slept all night. And
that was not us. We didn't have a nanny. I didn't. You don't know all the gear. I don't think it's
most people. Right.
Like, if I had a baby now, it would look a lot different on the road than it did for us then.
Do you wish you'd taken a nanny with you?
Well, we just didn't. I tried to hire someone before he was born, and we just didn't.
Couldn't,
And then it was like, well, here we are, I'm leaving this house.
Yeah.
And
so how long did you stay on the road?
So I went out, mid-March was when we first went out, because I remember Ward was 1 month old.
Oh my gosh.
And we were like, he was taking a nap.
But you weren't even really healed from having a baby on every level. Yeah, like you had no business going on the road.
Hanging by a thread, a hot mess, but I was like, I can't sit here alone anymore.
It's a hot mess at home or a hot mess on the bus.
At least there, I Charles is there.
Yes, to help a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Or just to like be there
And
to
a change
talk
of scenery.
to.
Yeah.
Because there's so much loneliness, I think, in that early part of motherhood because that child is really dependent on you for everything.
Did you have friends who had babies at that time that you could talk to?
I did, definitely. But I think, I don't know, it just felt like a very insulated world.
Yeah, it is. It can be very isolating. Yeah.
But we were on the road and he I remember for his nap, the day he was a month old and we were at a, Holiday Inn somewhere in Florida and he's taking a nap in this bed and it's like, oh, here, this is your life, buddy. Oh,
I still kind of love that story.
I know it was, but I mean, I think I took a picture too on the front lounge of the bus one time and it was like, all of this just baby stuff exploded
because they come with a lot. Those little tiny people. Yeah.
Right. But
so you and Charles, I don't actually know if you or Charles shared it first, but recently really just opened up a lot about his struggle with alcohol and getting sober and kind of both of your journeys, his and yours, and then yours as a family. And I would love you to share what you're comfortable with sharing because the few times I've heard you tell your story, I just think that there are so many women not necessarily married to a famous musician. I mean, if they could be married to a doctor or a builder, that it doesn't matter what you do for a living or where you live. This could absolutely be your story. And I think you've been just really brave about kind of sharing how hard it was and that it can really happen to anybody and to any family.
Yeah. And I think it's so important because before Charles got sober, I'd heard of AA, but I'd never really heard of Al-Anon or didn't know what that was. And ironically, I listened to this podcast, Armchair Expert, that I love. And it's the host, Dak Shepard, is sober. And I think I started listening. He had a very vulnerable episode. He'd been sober for, 15, 16 years, something, and he relapsed. And he had an episode called Day 7. And it was my first kind of touch point to, okay, what does this look like? Because I think when people aren't open about it, I mean, it's hard to know even what it looks like. Like, what does it look like when someone is in active addiction?
Had you ever grown up and, had you ever seen someone in addiction in your life?
There wasn't. If I had, I didn't.
Okay, it wasn't familiar to you.
No,
okay.
I am not an adult child of an alcoholic. And I think also with what goes along with this job is there's such a status quo of drinking is just accepted and excessive drinking is accepted.
And had you guys kind of always, when you met and were dating, would you go out and have wine and go out and drink together? And it was just...
I mean, we were in our 20s.
Yeah.
We didn't have kids. I mean, we were definitely partying together. Yeah. I think when the rubber really hit the road for me was when Ward was born.
Okay.
And then, as a mom, you have to get your shit together. Right. I mean, you can't be drunk at 1 a.m. and
hopefully not. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you
that's
definitely...
That's our advice from today.
Exactly. That was my perspective, at least. I mean, that everyone's life is different. But for me, it was like, okay, this lifestyle doesn't work for me anymore.
Before he had been born, had you ever thought it might be becoming an issue?
Again, I think my perception was clouded because that's just part of what you do in the music business.
Yeah.
You drink every night at a show and he was
doing what he was supposed to be doing.
And that's what everyone's doing. Yeah. That's it's just par for the course in entertainment and or being a touring musician. At least that's what I thought. I mean, now I know that doesn't have to be, but that was just kind of what our life looked like. There's always an excuse to celebrate. There's always an excuse to, sort of drown your sorrows. I mean, there's always a bottle open somewhere. But when Ward was born, where it just started, I started seeing the difference of his behavior because I wasn't doing that so much anymore. And then it definitely escalated in COVID. I mean, I think for a lot of people can identify with that of, well, we all started drinking a lot more in COVID.
We're home. We don't know what our future looks like, especially for musicians. If you were not in the music business, I mean, and I'm sure like you had heard people are like, oh, well, I'm an essential worker, so I'm great. And I was like, oh, that must be nice. Like, that's great for you. And like, we're just like waiting and shows are getting pushed back 1 month. And when you're a touring musician, I mean, we used to say people like 90% of our income comes from live shows.
Right.
And so people were like, oh, well, the show is canceled. I'm like, but to you just didn't get to go see a concert.
Right.
Like, this is our livelihood, right? And I think a lot of people, and there were a lot of industries like the restaurant business, the bar business, fitness places, all that kind of stuff that were affected so badly from a mental health perspective. And everybody coped. Some didn't cope. Right. And all of a sudden, Charles and you, but mostly Charles, has gone from like life literally as he's known it to, it's like, it was a literal standstill.
Right. And all we'd ever known in our marriage. I mean, it was
that.
And it, it was scary. We didn't know when it was going to come back. Like, it was just truly like everyone, month to month of like, what is life looking like? And then,
because it's not like you're at home on a vacation. You're at home feeling stressed. Like if someone had said 6 weeks, 100% certainty you're back on the road.
And at the beginning, it kind of was that. It was
2
like,
weeks, this is great. You're home 2 weeks. This is so fun. And then also it was like 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Right.
But that's what I used to say to people. It wasn't like a year at home of, because people say, oh, but it must be so nice he gets to be at home. And I'm like, but you don't know the stress he is going through every day.
Right.
That's not fun to be around for anybody.
Anyone. Yeah. And, there was also the secondary piece of like, we are responsible for a lot of other people's families.
Yes.
And
so what did you have a plan for all of that? Or was it the people on the road with you?
Thankfully, they had been very smart in their business for a long time, and they never had to let anyone go.
Okay.
They paid everybody's salary the whole time, and I think that is something that is incredible that they did.
Because a lot of people that didn't happen to.
And a lot of people couldn't do that. Right. I mean, so I commend them so much for just making that a priority for their business of like, these people are, they've worked with us for a very long time, and we want to make sure their families are taken care of. And so, there's that added pressure too of like, okay, we're not playing shows and we're not making any money, and we are spending a lot of money every month. And,
and you're just staring at each other every day, all day. You're watching the news, which is just depressing. You're hearing stories. And there was I felt like there's so much divide and politics and opinions. It just felt like a not fun world.
It was a tough season and really tough for Charles. And, especially I think for people who like that has been their identity for their whole life. And all of a sudden that's taken away.
Is he talking to you about all these feelings? Is he being verbal about it, or is it more just internalizing?
No, I think he just was internalizing it. And, we would talk sometimes, but there wasn't anything. I think he didn't even identify some of that until like, you can reflect back on it. But his drinking definitely escalated during COVID.
At home, just being at home.
Right.
And so you're actually now watching. Like you can see how much he's drinking. Yeah.
Right.
And are you mentioning, or is it are you sometimes saying, should you have more? Or how much have you had?
I definitely, fell into that role that a lot of, spouses who are married to or partnered with an alcoholic fall into, of just that constant mothering. They say motherhood, martyrdom, or mother martyr. I forget the other thing. But anyway, you fall into those roles of like, I'm going to give you a side eye if you're pouring another drink. Right. And then he, in return, would drink at me of like, you're not going to tell me not to do this. And that part of my own recovery has changed everything. And I had that gosh, it would have changed my life so much.
What would you have done differently for the woman who is currently at home giving her husband the side eye? Because I feel like that's what I would. I mean, what else are you supposed to do? Stare straight ahead?
Like, are you really starting to drink at noon?
Okay.
You know, but he'd like have a Zoom writing appointment, and he's like, well, I'm gonna, whatever.
I'm writing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I would say, what I've learned is, step one in my recovery program is the same as the steps are the same in AA and in Al-Anon. And
so Al-Anon is for family members?
Anyone affected by a family member or friend who is struggling with alcohol and addiction. So step one is I am powerless over alcohol, and my life has become unmanageable. And so to know that you are personally powerless, that person is also powerless over alcohol, but there's nothing I can do or not do to change his addiction. There's nothing, people cannot get sober for their spouse. They cannot get sober for their kids. They can get sober when they are ready to get sober, when they have had enough. And so I think what I would say to someone who is struggling in a partnership in active addiction right now is nothing you can do or not do is going to change his compulsion to drink or her compulsion to drink. And that realization, you have to allow that person who is in active addiction to take responsibility for themselves. And if the more you kind of try to manipulate and manage their life, the less likely they are to get sober.
Because was it almost, I don't know if he's ever said this, but was it almost like when you were making comments or the side eye, was it almost like you were shining a spotlight on something that he maybe thought was a problem, already knew was a problem? Like it was almost like a shame thing?
Totally. Okay. And people stay in addiction because of shame, or
which you weren't trying, obviously, to do.
No, or maybe I was a little bit.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, you can't shame someone into it. I tried every tactic, shame or acting hurt or, there's no tactic that works.
Okay.
There's just
so now are you arguing about just other things and not drinking because of the drinking?
I mean, I think our arguments about drinking definitely escalated. But, then that also gives an alcoholic a reason to drink. It's like, oh, well, you just are, nagging me or you pissed me off. I'm going to drink. I mean, you're not winning. You can't win because there's nothing you can do or not do to make them not drink.
Are you sharing this with anyone at the time, like friends or family?
Yeah. There were definitely times. There were moments that, and this is part of his story that, he can share or not share, or that he has shared some of, but where, there was a night that he didn't come home and the clocks ticked away, and he, didn't come home. He told me he was going to be home by like 11 and well, that came and went. Then he stopped answering his phone. And, by 4 a.m., I was just, our son's a very early riser. I was just thinking to myself.
How old's your son at this point?
He was 6.
Okay. Was he aware?
Maybe he was 5.
He's still little.
He's still little, but I think that he definitely, part of me was starting to notice him. He could tell when Charles would come home drunk and he would cling to me a little more. I think he didn't know what that was, but Dad was different.
Yeah.
But this night that he didn't come home, by 4 a.m., I was just like, God, let him come home before Ward wakes up.
Because you thought it will be bad because he's been out all night?
Yeah.
Like when he comes home?
Oh, yeah. If he comes in obliterated and our child is awake, that is going to be very hard. And thankfully, about 5 a.m., he rolled in. But there were moments like that where it was definitely like, I'm not doing this anymore. And after that moment, actually, I called a divorce attorney.
You did?
I did.
Because I was going to ask you, like, what was your rock? Like, what was your rock bottom?
Well, there were several.
Yeah. Well, please share.
That was
whichever you'd like
one.
To.
And that was right before Christmas of 2020. That was Christmas 2021, right before Christmas 2021. And that I called a divorce attorney. We were leaving for Christmas, so our schedules never aligned for me to go in and meet with her. But that.
Did he know you called?
I think I told him maybe a month later, but he didn't
Not
at the time. And
so it wasn't like he came home and you were like, I'm leaving you, this is over.
No. Okay. I had called a friend who was familiar with, our story and had lived a little bit of this. And she had sent me this person's name and said, just call them. See, just before you can even think about anything, just see what that process even looks like. And I really, so many of those times I was like, God, am I here?
Yeah. How did I get here?
Right.
Or do you find yourself looking back, like kind of like in your mind, like that reel of like, kind of like the story that we've said in those snippets, like an old movie playing and are like, how did we get here?
How did we get
here?
And
how did I miss it?
Right.
Like, where did we somehow go this way? Or do you do a lot of that in those moments? Are you just questioning everything?
I think I just was like at that point so overwhelmed with like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like there has to be another option. Yeah. And then, shortly, maybe a week after that, we were down in Florida for Christmas. And then Ward and I ended up going on vacation right after Christmas. And Charles had to stay in Nashville for something. And he had another crazy night out. And that next morning was like, I can't do this anymore.
He said that.
He said that. So that was right after Christmas 2021. And it was a period of about 3 months that he stopped drinking, but he was not in any sort of recovery program. He had no help. So he was, what they call just white knuckling it. Yeah. And even that brings out so many other issues.
I was going to say,
struggle.
What was that like being around someone who's trying to do it themselves?
I mean, it's worse because that person has no relief. There's a reason that people drink and then they're getting a relief from something. And then you're just sort of living with yourself and your problems and you have no relief. And so it's almost worse.
At any point during those few months, and I ask this because I just can see it would be a natural for someone to say, at any point during those few months, is he ever looking at you and saying, well, I'm doing this for you? Like, this is what you wanted.
Oh, yes, 100%, which is, again, you can never do it for someone else. And then that just creates, he's building his own resentment of like, I'm only doing this because
you give me a hard time about it.
I'm making you, And so that was a period of 3 months. And just what happens with every alcoholic is it creeps back and you bargain. You're like, okay, I'm only going to do beer and wine. All right,
That's what he said.
Yes. Yeah. I'm only going to do it on these occasions.
Because is he still on the road? Because wasn't there a time when he said that Dave and Hillary were like, we support you, we think you need help? Like, was he, when he did the 3 months on his own, was he still on the road?
He was on the road.
So he was still around
He played shows, yes. But even several years prior, Dave and Hillary had come to him and said, we think you have a problem. Wow.
How did he receive that?
Not
from
well.
them? Yeah. No.
He was not ready to receive it. Right. Not well. And his bar of like what's acceptable is like, okay, am I showing up for my job? Am I doing my job? Am I getting on stage every night? And like,
I remember the lyrics. Yeah.
Which sometimes maybe he didn't.
Yeah. No one would know.
But their perspective was like, well, we don't know who's going to show up on that stage every night. We don't know. So
that was like a huge anxiety on their behalf.
Completely. Yeah. And so at this point though, he did, show sober in this period. And then it, once he kind of let it come back in, it just came right back stronger than ever.
Does he say to you, I'm just going to try to have, like, does he tell you his plan?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And what are you saying or thinking?
I think part of me too was like, this sobriety is hard.
Not been fun either.
It's not
so
fun.
Let's try in the middle.
Yes, please.
Something.
I was completely in an unrecovered state myself and didn't know the answer and thought that, okay, well, he can control it.
Yeah. So what year? So COVID was like March 2020. So where are we now?
So now we're in March 2022. So he was sober from like right after Christmas 21 until March 2022.
Okay.
And then it just, again, came back stronger than ever. He was back on the road, but he was kind of trying to hide it a little bit.
From you? From them?
From me and Dave and Hillary. And he started drinking whiskey again, which was kind of his drug of choice. And that,
Are you at any point talking to Hillary and Dave about it? Or are they talking to you
they
about
knew.
it at all?
I mean, there was even a point out on the road that it was a, bad night, and I didn't know he'd been drinking whiskey again. And I heard it over the radio of him, on the talkback mic on the stage, ask for someone to bring one up on stage with him. And I was like...
Yeah. But then do you point that out after the show to him?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Which went over great. Yeah.
As you could imagine.
Yes. Yeah. But also, like, what are you supposed to do? I guess that's like,
well, that's
what do you also do just because you're just going to ignore it?
That's the piece of surrender that comes with step one in a program.
So in hindsight, you should have not said anything?
I should have said how I felt about it.
Okay.
And then made my own choices.
Okay.
I felt like at that point, I felt like I was just at the mercy of his drinking. Like I didn't have any choices. Yeah. I could control it. You get in that phase of like, oh, I can manage this. I can control this. And then your own life just spins out of control. I mean, I had become a very resentful person, a very difficult friend to be friends with, because I was just like on eggshells all the time. Probably as a mother, I was very snappy. I was tough. That piece of you don't realize how your own life is affected by the disease of alcoholism until you sort of can, reflect back. Yeah. But then, we ended up going on a trip with friends, June 2022, and, shit absolutely hit the fan.
Were you worried about going on that trip?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was never a time at this point where I was like not thinking about how I can control Charles's drinking.
So, yeah, because I was going to say, like, do you live... I had a friend who went through something similar with her husband, and they had a few children, and she said it had just got to a point where she never walked into a function, a school activity without that state of anxiety, because she said, I didn't know if he was going to turn up. And she said, most people wouldn't have noticed, but I would notice. And she said, and it got to the point where I just wished he wouldn't come.
Oh, I absolutely did.
You did?
I mean, I was like, I don't want to go anywhere with him because I know how this is going to turn out. And
was the trip you were going on like with friends or like a family trip?
It was with friends. It was for friends, her husband's 30th birthday. So it was much younger.
It was a celebration trip.
It was a celebration trip. And I had gone early. We were in London first, and then we flew to Greece. And, the time in London was so fun. I love...
By yourself?
By myself.
Yeah.
You start to, I can speak for myself, I started to sort of want those moments with Charles, but also dread them at the same time of just like, how am I gonna, you're at the point where you're thinking 10 steps ahead of like, okay, if this happens, how am I gonna do this? How are we gonna...
Like, what's my exit plan with him?
Totally. Yeah. Or how am I gonna, especially like, if he had been at the golf course, I knew he was drinking and he was going to come home for dinner. And it was like, oh, the second I heard his voice on the phone, I mean, I could tell with one peep of his voice how much he'd been drinking. Wow. And then it was like, oh, we're abandoning ship on this family dinner. We're not going to sit down at the table. Wow. I mean, you're just constantly trying to manage someone else's life and ignoring your own. Yeah. But, it absolutely hit the fan in Greece. And
did the friends that you were going with know what was going on?
I mean,
before they left?
They knew that he drank a lot. Okay. And would get, had all these.
But they hadn't seen him like.
Well, they had. Okay. I mean,
but it was just normal.
It was just normal, or that was him. Yeah. And, everybody else too was also like drinking a lot. Yes. You're on this celebratory trip. And so one night we all went out and he disappeared.
In Greece.
Didn't come home. My mom was keeping our son, and I think I called her at like 4 a.m. and was like, we can't find Charles. He disappeared. I mean, the guys in our group like had gone to the downtown area to look for him, couldn't find him. And I was like, I'm getting out of here. That was my tendency at that time of just
leave.
like the flight. Like I just have to get out of this situation.
Because you weren't feeling that like, I'm panicked, something's wrong, I'm staying here till I make sure he's okay.
Right.
You're like, I'm done.
I'm done.
Yeah.
And my mom...
Is it also kind of embarrassing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, and it's
because you
really,
feel like everyone's looking at you like...
It also was easy for me to slide into that victim role.
Okay.
Of just like, oh gosh, he's done all this. And, you know, that felt like that martyr victim place for me had started to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think I just obviously was going into that a little bit. But then I was just like, I got to get out of here. I told my mom, I'm getting on this flight. I'm going to be home. Because we weren't supposed to come home for another couple days. And she said, honey, I think you should stay in that country until you find your husband.
That mom wisdom.
I know. I was like, okay.
Oh, gosh.
And he turned off his phone. I was looking at our credit card bill to see like if he charged any. I mean, it was just a disaster.
He just went out for the night.
He just was gone.
Just gone.
And he eventually turned on his phone at like 8 a.m. I hadn't slept all night, and he called me to come pick him up.
Oh, gosh.
That, again, went over like...
Yeah.
But I went to get him, and I brought him back home. We were going to this really beautiful beach club for the day. There were like 30 of us in this group.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, and I just cried the whole time. I just cried the whole time of just like, I really cannot do this anymore. I am flying home. I'm filing for divorce. I can't do this. And he slept it off for a couple hours and then called me, and I was like, I'm headed to the airport. I'm leaving. He was like, well, I'm leaving too. I'm not going to stay here, if, you know. And he came to the airport. I was like not arranging anything for him.
I was like,
you know?
were you like, just get on a different flight? Do not get on my flight.
I didn't know what he was doing. I mean, and his, you know, tour manager had booked him, whatever. We get to the airport. Of course, he's on my flight.
Of course, yeah.
And I was like, I broke down so much in that moment when I saw him, because I wasn't even mad anymore.
Yeah.
I was just so sad and
because
so
you still
done.
love him, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just was done.
Yeah.
And there was a piece, we were, you know, at the airport together. Of course, our flight was delayed. It was a comedy of errors of this flight that was just truly, in hindsight, like God forcing us to be there together. We can't leave, you know, we are here. Yeah. And we both just got to a place of vulnerability where I was like, you have a problem.
At the airport.
You have got to get help at the airport. He said, I know. And we're both crying. And he was very honest about a lot of things that he had not been honest about before. And it was a place of like, we are going to just have radical honesty together. Yeah. And his manager found him a rehab place to go to, a treatment center. And we were flying back to London from Greece, and we just said, we're going to have radical honesty. And I told him, I said, you know, I don't want to be married to you anymore. I'm going to go home.
Was that a shock to him when you said that? He didn't think you were that serious.
He never thought I would do that.
And did he not think it was that bad for you? Like, was he unaware of how much it was hurting you at the time?
I don't know. I think he definitely just kind of, you know, when you're in that active addiction spiral, it's a very self-centered place, and a place that's also like filled with shame. And so I think he just knew or didn't care, you know, that place where it's like the addiction is just controlling you. I think he just didn't know a way out and couldn't do it alone, and so he just couldn't consider me.
Right.
But we flew back to London, had some really honest conversations. I had already booked a hotel room there and was like, this is where I'm staying. You're not staying with me. He stayed at a different hotel. And that night, I mean, he says, he's talked about this, was just like the lowest point that's ever been for him. He had that finally, for the first time, realization of like, I could lose all of this.
Have you learned in kind of everything you've done since that for someone who's in addiction, they have to have that, like, is there that rock bottom? Is there usually that one thing that happens?
I don't know if it's always a one thing. It's usually, in my experience, been like many things that lead up to a final straw. Right. And sometimes it's not as dramatic as disappearing in Greece. It's just like a final straw of, I can't do this anymore. I mean, and he even talks about what
he was going to lose.
Right.
Yeah.
But he even talks about of being at that point of relief, of like, God, I don't have to do this anymore.
Because he felt like he had unburdened things he had been doing that he hadn't shared or felt shameful for.
And that he could be relieved of what the disease had done to him, you know? And that really was just a place for both of us of the beginning of healing.
Yeah. So he had agreed to go, by London, he's agreed he's going to go to treatment.
He's agreed to go to treatment.
Are you feeling hopeful or are you cautious?
Can you see it? I was hopeful for him, but I still didn't know how, of all of the damage that had been done, how I could recover and be in a healthy marriage with him from there. So I always told him, I was like, I am going to walk through this with you because we will always co-parent our child, but I don't think that I can be married to you. And so that's where we were. And he went to treatment and
how long is it a set time or does it depend on the person?
It's 30 days, but that's, as one of his counselors told me who's at the treatment center, like that's just the number insurance gives them.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people are there for longer. Yeah. Some people can be there for shorter.
Are you talking during this time?
Yes, there were 2 times a day where he has his phone and we can talk, and just immediately I could see the difference in him. I mean, I could hear it in his voice. I could just, it was a different person already. I could tell that whatever needed to be broken open in him had been broken open.
Because it's not just when someone goes to treatment, to rehab, it's not just that they're going somewhere and they're not giving them any alcohol, right? Like they're giving them massive amounts of therapy to get to the bottom of all that, coping tools. Okay.
Yes. Alcohol is the symptom.
Yeah.
That is the tool that has worked for someone to cope for a long time until it stops working for them, So it's a recovery center where they learn how to be who they are. He learned how to deal with himself. And yes, it's a ton of therapy, and the place where he went, which was incredible. And he had such a great experience there. I had a great experience with him there. They do a family week. So at a period during his treatment, I flew out there, and then you do therapy together. And you do all sorts of work together. And then the family is also introduced to the realities of what addiction is, the disease component of it, all of the scientific pieces of what that actually is. For an alcoholic brain, what he experiences when he's drunk is a different experience than I feel.
What's he experiencing?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know. Okay.
But the addiction is in his brain is much stronger than what I feel.
Feelings, yeah.
So I can't, I don't even know what that is. And I think that that's the same for a lot of people in whatever addiction it is. It's like their experience in that, the relief of that is different than if you don't have that addiction. So you can't understand. Yeah. But that's where I was introduced truly to what it meant when they say the family disease of alcoholism, because it affects everyone.
Was there any point during that first initial treatment, because you're still your wounds are still very raw. Yes. You still don't know if you're going to stay married. Was there any point, I'm just thinking of myself, going out to that family weekend, they're telling you all this stuff about Charles, he's this, these are all the things you're going to need to work on. Was there any point of you that thought that week, I'm too tired, I don't have anything left in me to deal with this?
Yes. I mean, I was mad.
Yeah.
I was
why am I doing all this work now? Yeah.
Bro, you created this.
Right. And now I'm out here.
I'm having to do all this. I'm out here. But, as you get into your own program, you realize it is a family disease.
When did you start? How soon after did you start going?
So I started going. I went to my first Al-Anon meeting after I left that family week. And that was, at their suggestion. I mean, the big piece of that is, the big piece of that is, you can't take a person out of their situation, give them all of these tools, and then drop them right back into that same situation. That won't work.
Right.
So the scenario around the disease has to have a different perspective. And again, I didn't even know if I was still going to be married to him, but I knew we would have to co-parent our child together. So I was willing to walk all of this with him so that we could do that in a healthy way. But I started to go into Al-Anon, and it absolutely, I can't overstate how that has changed my life in so many more ways than even just dealing with the effects of addiction.
Like how you communicate with him, how you deal with him?
How you deal with life.
Okay.
I mean, it's, yes, definitely how I deal with him, but also how your perspective on the life, the one wild and precious life you're given has changed, and how important it is to take care of yourself, to put your own oxygen mask on first. And there's just so much wisdom and so many tools. And there's something about being in a room of people who you don't know, come through all different walks of life, from every socioeconomic level, every background, and the vulnerability that is in that room that everyone shares is so impactful.
Wow.
I mean, it is life-changing.
Wow. Well, everybody, if they're listening, I hope goes if they're struggling with that. So how long was he in treatment before he came home?
He was there for about a month.
A month, okay. And did he come home to you?
He came home. Yes. I mean,
and you were fine with that?
I was fine with that. I was not trying to get too far ahead, or I had already could see the difference in him. And so each piece of his willingness allowed me to have willingness to just keep trying to repair. I also immediately came back and went to a place called Onsite that's outside of Nashville, and did an intensive program there. And, I knew enough at that point to know whether or not I stayed married to him, I was going to have to
heal.
Yeah. I was going to have to deal with myself.
Because I'm sure you still had some major PTSD.
Oh,
yeah.
Major.
I'm sure you probably still might have a little bit hanging on. Yeah.
I mean, the way that we have been able to heal and the way that recovery has worked for us is truly a miracle.
Yeah.
I mean, the miracle of recovery is the things that you're no way I could ever get past that. And you don't get past it so much as you just understand. I was able to separate the disease from the man. And I knew that whatever had happened in his addiction was not the person that he was.
Yeah. When did you feel like you got the man back away from the disease?
When he was in rehab.
You did? That soon? Wow.
I mean, and there was obviously a lot of work to do for both of us as we move forward. We still do. I mean, I think people also expect oh gosh, I've just wanted this person to be sober for so long. Once they get sober, everything's fixed.
It'll be right back to like it was before COVID.
And no,
it's not.
That's not the way it works.
But it's better.
It's better. Yeah. You have tools to communicate. I know the way that my, interactions, communication either help or don't help the situation.
You do. You've figured that out.
Yep. Okay. And you're constantly learning. I mean, you're never you're always in recovery. You're never recovered. That piece of it, but also his willingness to continue his own recovery program is, we're doing it for ourselves.
Did it take you a while to get out of that kind of mothering thing, even when he came back and was not drinking?
Mother, martyr, manipulator. Those are the three. Absolutely. I mean, I still kind of fall back into those places sometimes, but now I can tell when I do, and I can acknowledge it, and I have tools to get out of that.
When did you know, I'm going to stay married to him? I'm not working on this just to co-parent. This is the man that I've been waiting to come back. Because was it the same man that used to be there, or do you feel like you got
a
bit
new
of a
person.
new version? Yeah.
I got a new person that I had never met before.
Wow. I love that.
And
how long did that take?
I mean, I truly felt like just as once he started that sobriety journey, the pieces just sort of kept
tumbling.
Tumbling.
Kind of like how you said with the drinking. It just was like tumbled. Yeah.
And, it just kept getting better. And there were definitely times where we both, fell back into old patterns and got in arguments, and it was hard. But, now we weren't also navigating drunkenness, and so it like any marriage, I mean, there's still definitely things that are hard and that we have to navigate, but, we are doing it by trying to be the healthiest version of ourselves as we can be.
How have you explained it to Ward? Have you, or is he, I mean, he's young, but he's not, he's kind of at that middle ground age.
Yeah, he was 6 when Charles went to rehab.
Okay.
And what we talked to him about then was I told him, Daddy's at feelings camp.
Feelings camp.
He's away. He's learning how to feel his feelings better and how to be a better daddy and how to be a better husband to mommy. And that was, a way that we could sort of communicate it as where he could sort of understand a little bit. And then we also, kids can understand allergies. Yeah. So we, say Daddy has an allergy to alcohol. It makes him really sick when he drinks it. And so he doesn't drink alcohol anymore.
And he gets that.
Mommy doesn't have the allergy to alcohol. So sometimes I will have a glass of wine and that's okay.
Was that ever, I wonder about that too. Is that ever a thing? Like, do you ever feel like you can't have a glass of wine in front of him?
At the beginning, it was like back in that old patterns of trying to like control the situation of like, oh, I can't drink. This is going to make him want to drink. But back to step one, there's nothing I can do or can't do that will make him drink. It is his choice whether he picks up a drink and drinks.
Right. So you having a drink really has no effect on him. Yeah. Because if he wanted to drink, he would just drink.
He would drink.
Yeah.
If he is in a situation where he feels uncomfortable, it's his responsibility to take himself out of that and to communicate that. But that's not my responsibility. Gotcha. He is responsible for himself. And I am responsible for making choices that are healthy for me.
So he's been sober for
22 months.
22 months. Wow. New person. I would, and I was thinking about this when I was thinking of speaking to you, I would imagine that there are constantly people now who are saying to him, like, congratulations, this is so awesome. You've put in so much hard work. Look how far you've come. Do people ever say that to him and then turn to you and say the same thing?
I think people who are in recovery can acknowledge that. Yeah. And we get that a lot. And, I get so much purpose also out of, I get so many messages back to the dumpster fire of social media. I feel like it's been good in a way. I get so many people who reach out. It's mostly women, wives of like, what do I do?
What do I do?
Where do I go? Yeah. And that has given me a lot of purpose to be able to share our story and say there's hope. Yeah. People do recover. You can, even if the person that you are with is still in active addiction, there are things that can help you, and you can live your own life and find joy and happiness even though that person is still in active addiction. And, I appreciate the fact that I can share my perspective because I think there aren't a lot of people who, again, people know what an alcoholic is. Right. They know that there's AA, but there's not a lot of people who know that there is a program for families and that there is help.
And probably a lot of people would look at the spouse and think, well, why aren't you just happy? He's sober. This is what you wanted.
Right.
Just be happy. What's the problem?
Right.
Like, why are you still feeling this way? Which is why I think it's so awesome that you are speaking about it. What made him or you decide you were going to share the journey of this?
Well, when he came out of rehab, they were about to start a tour. Okay. It was like a week that tour was about to start. And thank God, Hillary and Dave were like, we're not doing that.
Oh, they did. Okay.
We're not just gonna, this needs
time,
some space.
Yeah.
Because so much of they were very much affected by his, active addiction, and everybody needed a minute.
Yeah.
So when they were going to have to postpone their tour, Charles, it was his choice. He was like, we have to tell the truth. Otherwise, people are going to think we're breaking up as a band, or the tour's not selling, or there's all these other things. Like, we have to be honest.
Yeah.
And a lot of people on his team were like, "Ooh, are you sure you're like so new in sobriety? Like, are you sure you're ready to like announce this?"
Yes.
Because, relapse does happen. And but he was sure. And he said, we got to tell this. And so that naturally just opened up us being honest, whether we liked it or not. It was like, this is out in the world.
Right.
We talk about this now.
Maybe you'll write a book one day.
I don't know.
Both of you. You could do like half and half, his and her perspective.
I know. And I don't.
Do you journal? Do you write stuff down now? You don't. Okay.
I don't.
Yeah, I know. Me neither. I know.
I did kind of at the beginning of his sobriety, but I don't anymore, and I should.
Yeah, I know.
But I think that, I'm very cautious not to try to think any more of like, we got this.
Do you just kind of do a day at a time? Is that your kind of mindset?
One day at a time, fully.
Yeah. Without that expectation. Yeah.
Because anything could happen.
Yeah.
You're never,
it's a lot of pressure to live up to.
It's pressure. And there's always a chance that someone can relapse.
Do you feel like if that happened, you would be so much better equipped now?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. And does that give you a sense of peace knowing that?
I think the sense of peace comes from, I know I will always be okay. And I'm only responsible for myself. And he is responsible for himself. And the peace also comes from knowing that if relapse happens, we all have tools now that we didn't have before, and that you don't have to necessarily start from square one.
Gotcha.
You can get back up, and you know how to do that.
Yeah.
One of the things that his counselors in rehab said to me, because I was, he was talking about like, I just couldn't stop and this, and the counselor stopped him and he said, you didn't know how to. And that was so impactful for me. It was like, oh yeah, he didn't have a roadmap. He didn't know how to stop.
Yeah.
Because, he couldn't do it on his own.
Wow. Well, you guys have a beautiful love story. I'd never even heard your love story. So I'm so glad you shared it. But you have a beautiful love story. And, even though that was rough, it's like a season, right? And
it's given us so many gifts from that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of, if you'd told me at that point, like, gosh, you're going to look back on this and have gratitude. I've been like, no.
Everything happens for a reason. You're like, oh, please stop.
Right.
Stop.
But I do. I have gratitude for the recovery that we have in our lives and for the way that it has made us both better.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. I have so enjoyed this conversation and just your honesty. And I think a lot of women are going to be very inspired by this. So,
well, I hope that it helps just one.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Kelley, thanks.